Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvellously well. I am incredibly excited because we have the rather wonderful Mr. David Bottrill back again for part 2. How are you?
I'm very well. As I was saying, it's quite warm here for mid-February, so we're enjoying a little bit of early spring. Perhaps the groundhog was wrong.
All right. Well, we left off, Eric was just telling me, at Mudvayne. So that's 2002.
Mudvayne and our tubing trips down the river. Well, we were working in the studio where they made Nevermind. In Utero. I'm sorry. They made Nirvana did In Utero.
Oh, yeah, I've worked there. That's in Minnesota.
Right. Minnesota.
Pachyderm.
Pachyderm.
Yeah,
that's it.
Pachyderm. Yeah. I don't know if we reminisced about this last time, but my experience with Pachyderm, and I wonder, was this similar to Mudvayne, is there was 2 reasons to go to Pachyderm. Well, obviously it was, had a nice neve and it was, but the main reason was because it was a long way away from everybody. So It served 2 purposes. In my instance, with the artist I went to, so I'd be intrigued whether this was a similar one, was because he had a major drug problem and we were trying to get him away from a major city. Yes. But obviously the other, you said yes.
Yes. Well, so it wasn't the same. It was similar reasons. We definitely went there for sure for the remoteness. And it's really interesting. I was sort of doing some research on some old music just for fun. And I remembered Headley Grange for Zeppelin 4 was kind of the same, that they did the same thing. They got off so that there wasn't a pub really nearby, or there wasn't, a big watering hole. A distraction. Yes, exactly. Distractions.
And then also the other reason, which may have played quite heavily into your reason for going there, was to get away from the quote unquote suits.
Well, yes. I mean, in those days, they sometimes were a little bit intrusive, but over the years, I've always tried to be like an inclusive producer. So yes, I would want to get away from the suits to a certain degree, but I would include them in discussions about things. I always felt that with everybody involved in making a record, the more you can make everybody feel ownership a little bit, then at that point, when the phone call comes in at 4:30 on Friday from a record store in Des Moines, Iowa, where the shipment hasn't shown up yet, the person will want to get on the phone and deal with it if they like you, if they really believe that they have a piece of that record. So yes, to a certain degree with creative control, I would try to keep the bands and the sort of more business side separate.
That's such a difficult thing to do. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think being inclusive is a skill that I learned from working with guys like Jack Douglas, who are just supreme kind of politicians. They make everybody feel important. All ideas are welcome, and there's no hierarchy in the studio with him or with labels and management and stuff. But a very difficult thing to maintain, because labels and managers will be pushing their agenda on you.
What I've found over the years is this. For me, as long as you listen to their idea and say, you know what? That's not a bad idea. Let's give it a go. If you then come back and say, you know what, we tried that idea and here's why it worked or didn't work, that often is enough. As long as you give them the respect of, you know what, you have ideas too. That's fine. Let's hear them. Okay, worked, didn't work, but we tried it. Rather than just the brick wall, like, you're a suit. We don't believe that you're creative, or we don't believe that your ideas have value. If you give them the value, if you give them the respect that, you know what, your idea might be a good idea, and give it a go, then at least they'll be appreciative of you trying their thoughts. And if you're reasonable about why it didn't work or why it did work, or you might say, we tried that idea and it didn't work, but it led us to this, and this was a really good idea, and that was part of the genesis of your idea that we modified into that. So, as long as you give people respect, and a lot of these people have been in the industry for a long time, and they're worth listening to.
I had a personal experience where I was working with a huge artist, and that band had dynamics between them, and an A&R guy foolishly inserted himself in the dynamics. So I always say with bands, as much as you can see the turmoil, between band members, it's like a marriage. You do not want to get involved in that marriage. And I saw an A&R guy do that and side with the singer over the guitar player, and they were co-writers. And he was fired within 2 days off the project. And from the singer. Even though he sided with the singer wakes up one day, and it's a little bit like telling your wife that you don't like the father, don't like her father. Yeah. My wife might say my father's an a-hole, and if I say, yes, I agree, I just called her father an a-hole.
Yes. Yeah. No, you do not get in between band members. I don't think that's a very poor business practice. I think it's same thing with like your kids. You never get between your friends and their kids, right?
Right.
It's again, you'll not be their friend anymore. They're gonna side with their kids. And band members, if there is like a creative tightness, even they may argue, they may disagree on things, but ultimately they're the band, and they will generally coalesce as a unit against outsiders. And if you try to insert yourself, I try to do that when I'm doing things. I try to insert myself not as a member of the band, but as a sort of co-conspirator with the band, and I do my best to try to support them all, and say, like let's listen to all ideas, and let's all give all ideas a try, and give them equal value. Like I'm not the kind of producer that comes in and fires the drummer. Like a lot of producers, that's sort of like step one. It's like you fire the bad rhythm section and you bring in, I never did that. It's like, even if they were not the best, they were still part of the band, and the band was creating with them in it. If the band wanted to fire them, that's a different story. If that was the case, or if I had a drummer quit in mid-session and I had to go out and hire another drummer, and I hired a great drummer, and the record was probably, I don't know if it was better or worse. The drums were tighter a little bit because he was a seasoned session musician. Regardless, I try to work with the tools I'm given on any project, and that includes the band members.
So Mudvayne at the time they're pretty well known. I mean, in 2002, that's when the album came out. That's pretty much new metal territory. That was
full on new metal section. Yeah.
So what were the expectations for the record going in on that one? You've got the ability to go to Pachyderm, so obviously they're flying you out somewhere. It's a residential studio for those people that don't know.
I think they had pretty high expectations. I mean, they'd come off the last one with Garth, and it had done well and sort of won, I think they won a Grammy of Best New Artist or something like that for it. So we went in doing this one. They had high hopes. So, we worked very hard on it. And I pushed Chad quite a lot, to the point where he kind of didn't like me by the end of it, because he was quite a screamy singer, right? He has that real screamy thing. And I got him to do it a lot until it was just right. And, he was not happy about it, but the results speak for themselves. It's a great record, and it's done very well for them, I think. It had a couple of hits off of it, and I still see the royalty check. So it obviously did enough that it did enough for the label. They were, I think, happy about it, and I think the band were.
I'm excited to get back into some Peter Gabriel here. Although I see, looking at discography here, I've got the Scorpion King. What song was used that you produced and mixed in that? So
Scorpion King was Godsmack. We did the song Godsmack. I Stand Alone. That was the first thing that Sully and I did together. The band and I did together, and he wrote it for that soundtrack, and that turned into the Faceless album that we did after that. So it was, I Stand Alone. We did it in this little studio up in New Hampshire, I think it was. Little place in a house out in the woods. It was really amazing, and this is no disrespect to the drummer at the time, but Sully is a drummer himself. So that what happened was we were recording the track. He'd written the track, and we were working on it. We were doing drums. Tommy was playing, and it was good. It was sort of working through, but it didn't have quite the thing that I was looking for. And Sully was a little bit unsure about it too. And so he's like, "Look, Tommy, I want you to do it like this." And he went in and he played it once through. And I was like, okay. So he came back into the studio, and I said to Sully, "Look, let's give Tommy another couple of goes, but if it's not quite right, go in and play this, because you obviously have a feel for it." And this is not any slight to how Tommy plays. It was just for that particular song, that's what was necessary. And Sully's right foot is pretty incredible. It's really strong, right? It's consistent, and the kicks were solid and consistent, and the tightness of the way he plays. It's just that tightness, and it's very, very concise, and is very precise in what he plays with a lot of power. And that's what was necessary for that song. And so he went in and he actually tracked the drums on that song.
That makes sense. I mean, as a writer, I mean, that's obviously the story of Dave Grohl with the first Foo Fighters record. He toured with a band after that. But yes, there's something unique about the songwriter also being a world-class drummer, means that they can get all those pushes, all those It's a bit like, and maybe you can expand upon this. I know a lot of the times with heavy music of that period, for instance, the guitar player would also end up playing the bass lines.
Yes.
Because you'd have like that, and to match that exact groove and feel, it was just easier to hand the bass over to the guitar player to play exactly the same rhythm.
Well, if you think, funnily enough, of Mudvayne, going back to them very briefly, Greg would play the bass lines essentially, and Ryan was like the lead player, and he was the bass player. But his bass playing was quite flowery and involved, but holding down that solid groove was Greg and Matt, basically.
The great Peter Gabriel again. Now, you were telling me with Up, was this a song that was left over from Us?
Yes. Yes. So we recorded the song for us a number of times, and then when they went on to work for the next record, they took that track, reworked it, but there was still a lot of the stuff that I had recorded on there that was still used in the final mix. The way Peter works, it's a constant reworking, rejigging, changing, overdubbing on top of, building things. Like I said, for the last record, there's probably a million different, in his vocal mic, there's a million different versions you can hear going on depending on which line he's singing. And so some of my stuff will be in there, and then it'll be the newer parts.
Did you finish it up at that period in 2002, or did they just literally use everything from the Us record?
They used some of it from the Us record, but then they would have done a lot of reworking of it.
Oh, I see.
And tailoring it to that other record, because that other record was very different, right? The Up record was a different vibe, and he would have reworked it into the stylistic nature of that album.
More soundtrack stuff. Triple X, the movie, again, that time, 2002, which was it another heavy band?
It would have been a heavy band, probably either Mudvayne or Faceless.
Faceless came out the year after, so it was probably Mudvayne.
Oh, that would be Mudvayne.
Yeah.
Mudvayne, there was a song from it on Ghost Ship as well.
Nice.
Some of that for Ghost Ship, it was on that, which wasn't a hugely successful movie,
back in the sort of end of the days when soundtracks meant something.
You know what's funny? I love great soundtracks, right? Mm-hmm. And I was really disappointed. We're kind of jumping into the future, and the past. One of my favorite movies was Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner.
Oh, masterpiece.
And when the new one came out, I was really excited because I knew this composer, Johan Johansson, had done a soundtrack for it. Well, at the last moment, the film company kind of panicked and got Hans Zimmer to redo it. And it was basically 2 weeks before release that they had to do it. So essentially, I'm sure it was a very team effort, and it was a lot of sound design, which was interesting. But for me, the original Blade Runner had themes, right? You had themes for people, and it was a built thing. It was very modern at the time, very 80s synthy soundtrack, but it still had that thematic character. The new one was very arresting to listen to and very exciting, but it just didn't have as much musicality to it. And I'm not saying that Hans Zimmer's not musical. I'm just saying that the amount of time they probably had to do it, it's like, we got to get something together. Here's a few things I've got already, and here's some sound design. And that was it. And I was really, really disappointed. And soundtracks, like you said, back in the day, they really meant something. And in that one particularly, it just didn't mean that much. It was, like an exercise in sound design for me.
So you mentioned obviously working with Godsmack on The Scorpion King. Was that sort of your baptism of fire to work with them to see whether you would do their next album?
Yes, basically that was, I think, a tester to see how we got along on that track. And see if our working methods were similar, or whether we liked each other and would get along. And Sully and I got along very well. So, and the rest of the band. So, it went from that to very soon after that we headed down to Miami, North Miami. Sully told me a fantastic story when they were trying to build their career while you were on tour with them, I guess. They were doing shows in and around like Boston and Lawrence, which is where they were from, which is very near Boston. Tough town, right? Well, Sully, I don't know if a lot of people know, but he's, let's say, diminutive.
Yes.
And although he's very strong and quite tough, but he's not the biggest of guys. But when they were playing their shows locally, a lot of the Hells Angels were coming to their shows and, of course, scaring off the rest of the patrons. So Sully went around to the local office of the Hells Angels, had a meeting with their leader at that time and said, look, if you don't mind, you're scaring away our fans. We're trying to break it. Can you stop coming to our shows?
Wow.
And the guy went, okay. And they stopped coming to the shows. Godsmack got bigger and bigger. But I mean, talk about cojones, right? Like,
yeah, he's probably about 5'8", 5'9", isn't he? He's not the tallest guy. Yeah.
Oh, I think might be a little shorter than that.
I'm trying to be generous.
I think I'm 5'8", 5'9".
He's definitely like buff, like he works out.
He's buff. He's absolutely very strong.
Yeah, he's definitely strong, and he's got tattoos in places that are like, he's definitely got an aggressive thing about him, especially on stage. He's amazing on stage.
Yeah, but just think about going into the Hells Angels and asking them to not come to your show.
300-pound, 6'5", hairy guys. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah,
I'd be terrified. But he wanted his band to succeed, and good on him. Yep. The great band, great performers, and they put on a great show.
Amazing.
That's it's kind of my rant against the modern industry of people becoming famous on TikTok or YouTube and not being able to actually put on a show every night for a 3-month tour, which is what you have to do.
Yeah.
Right? To get longevity, to get fans that will come to see your show and buy your merch and do that time and time again. You just got to. There's no other way to develop that fan base. You'll get peripheral fans who want to hear that one song you put up on TikTok. I've really been lucky with most of the bands that I've worked with. They have a work ethic, right? They understand. They've learned over the years what it takes to actually be successful in this industry, and it's hard work. And you just have to get that through to people sometimes. This is hard work.
So let's get back to a personal favorite, of course, the great Peter Gabriel.
The thing that I did that was really interesting with Peter, so the Millennium Dome soundtrack that he had written music for in England, and it was where they were going to put on a performance for the entire year of dance and music, and Peter wrote all the music for it, and I mixed it in the Millennium Dome on the speaker system in there, and I had to do it overnight. And a lot of it was reworked tracks from other things or things that we had recorded before for other albums that didn't make it. He reworked this for the music for this performance. And so there were times when the workers would be working through the night with me, but of course I'd have to have the speakers blaring. And at one point I had a guy come up from the working crew who was just like, if you don't shut this stuff off, we're going to kill you. Because it was really loud percussive drums, almost like Rhythm of the Heat kind of drums. Like we were using some of the old tracks of that to rework, to do this piece. Anyway, and I was mixing this stuff, like mixing the Burundi drummers in the middle of the Millennium Dome empty while the workers are still working on it over and over and over again. You know what it's like watching a mix, right? If you're not involved in it, it drives you nuts. So this was super loud as they were working, building the Millennium Dome. And I almost had a palace coup or execution because I was working too loud. I was like, oh man, sorry guys. I turned it down. But so I did the whole soundtrack in a sort of surrounding, like it was very early. It wasn't Atmos, but it was very early multi-speaker system all the way around this huge dome. And it was called OVO. And I had to mix it overnight for about 3 months up until the turn of the millennium. And then it was in 99. And then they played it for the next year in the Millennium Dome as a performance.
Did we touch on Joni Mitchell? Did we touch on that earlier?
No, not at all. So so early on, when I was working, so after we did the So album, Peter was writing and doing other things, but his studio was sort of sitting empty and I was sort of taking care of it. Well, at the time, Joni Mitchell came across and her husband, Larry Klein, the time, Larry Klein, was doing a record with Ben Orr. Ben Orr, the singer and bass player from the Cars.
Amazing.
They were working at the studio called the Wool Hall, which was over the other side of Bath, and it was owned by Tears for Fears. So he was making the album there. Incredible. Joni was there as well, but she wasn't working on a record per se, but she saw that there was a studio open and Peter said, just come and use my studio. And this was like a cowshed. It wasn't like the studio that Real World has become. It was just a barn. And so she would come, and Joni, bless her, was very nocturnal. And I was not very nocturnal. So we worked for about a month in that studio, and then Christmas came, and so I left and went home for Christmas. But it was a challenge to do, because I had a hard time turning my day 180 degrees around, starting at like 7, 8 at night and going through till 7 in the morning. That was a challenge. I mean, one of the things we did with her, and we recorded some at there, and we did some at the Wool Hall too. And for that song Secret Place, we actually got her guitar and recorded it. And I did that technique of like speeding the tape up, speeding the tape, slowing the tape down, and recorded it. And instead of recording it just like a double or maybe 3, we did it on a full 24 track. And so she played the song through that many times, and then we bounced that down into a stereo file, and it became this whole shimmery, rich guitar, because it was done essentially, all the way through the song 22 times, because we needed the time code. But other than that, yeah, it was great, and it was one of my first experiences of multi-tracking that much the same thing, and it was really exciting. Like, how you do if you do like electric guitars sometimes that much, they actually get a little smaller.
Yes,
like if you gang them up too much, then they just turn into this tiny little sound. Well, with the acoustic, because we had let the natural chorusing and the speed of the tape go up and down, it turned into this huge shimmering thing. It's really beautiful.
I suppose I'm thinking Jeff Lynne, of course.
Yeah, sure.
I think Jeff Lynne's technique, because we're our producers and engineers, wasn't his technique to blend DI'd acoustics in with mic'd acoustics?
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, that would work. I don't love the sound of a DI guitar straight
Not
by
on its
itself.
own. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But in the blend, yeah, that would be interesting for sure. As long as it wasn't like one of the most featured ones.
Right.
It's funny. One of my least favorite ones are those when you have those nylon string DI guitar.
Yeah.
It's just
those are horrific. Yeah. Yeah. I never understood ovations, and when I was a little kid and I saw Jimmy Page in the 80s, with an ovation, I was just like, what are you doing?
What is that? What is that? Yeah, I know. I've owned Ovation guitars, so I do, I did use them, and there's a certain, for live, they became the thing that made it easier to play an acoustic guitar live.
Absolutely,
so give that to them. But yeah, just in the studio, the DI acoustic guitar was,
right. Although I'm guessing in your hands, maybe you did some stuff where you took a DI acoustic and put it through amps and pedals and stuff.
Yeah, I would do all that for sure. I would do anything to make it, give it something interesting, because just the straight DI was, not great. Yeah, an electric guitar could be great, right? Like funk guitar. A lot of like Leo Nocentelli guitar when he played on Peter's Us record, right? He came and played. He just plugged straight into a desk, and that was it. It was he didn't want an amp. He didn't. It's like straight DI, and it sounded amazing.
Yeah, Nile Rodgers, Stephen Lipson told me that was his thing. He said it was most of the time it was out of being in a studio. I think one of the things that we're used to now, as like a look around there, you've got a Music Man bass sitting behind you, you've got a Strat sitting behind you. Yeah. But most studios that we'd go and work in back in the olden days of maybe only 10 or 15 years ago, there was never any instruments.
Yeah.
So maybe the engineer producer had their own Strat with them or something like that. But just plug it in, put a compressor on it.
That's it. Yep. I do that all the time. I pull it over, stick it into my UAD, and away I go. Yeah. These days, of course, we have so many different amps to choose from in the box. It's like, so then I had moved to New York at this point, and this was like the realization of a dream. I had wanted to live in New York since I was in high school. Even in the dirty 70s, there was something about New York that was just, John Lennon said it best. It's like, if you were living during the time of Rome and you wanted to be in the center of things, you'd go to Rome, right? At that time, New York was the center of the creative universe. Like, I'm going to be in New York. I loved that city. So I'd moved to New York. It was really exciting. And I met up with the Stain guys, and they wanted to make a record, but they were based in Springfield, Massachusetts, and they wanted to do it there. So we tracked up at a studio up in upstate New York. It's now closed, unfortunately, but it's a beautiful studio on top of a mountain, huge quadrangle courtyard kind of thing, fantastic place. Did some great drums there. It was in this huge, actually huge. The actual studio space itself was too big for the drums because it was cavernous. So they actually had a smaller drum room that we used. But then we moved up to Springfield and essentially built a studio. So I had some great inputs. I had my Pro Tools system that I would carry with me anyway. So for your more sensitive listeners, let's just say the drummer of the band who'd completed his parts, we were going to be overdubbing. He knew, let's just say, some local businessmen who had a large building, in the ground floor of which was a gentleman's club.
Oh, okay.
And that club had 2 floors, and then there was a 3rd floor. Well, Staind had the entire 3rd floor of this essentially huge industrial building. So all of their staging was there, all of their storage. They'd rehearse there. So we built a control room. And I had them, they said, what kind of size should it be? What dimensions? So I gave them a sort of shape, trapezoidal shaped room to build. And I put in all my gear, brought my microphones, and they had some microphones. And we did all the overdubs there. But in order to get into the studio, we had to go to the gentleman's club. So we'd show up at 11 o'clock with the girls, walk into the well-lit and dramatically less romantic-looking gentleman's club, walk up the stairs, through the VIP rooms, up through a back door, and into the studio. And that was about 3 months of making a record up in Springfield, Massachusetts, above the strip club.
You said the word strip club there. I don't know if we were talking about this on camera or not, but yeah, there's definitely people who like to get into the music industry, start a label, start a recording studio for the glamour of it all. But it's, I don't know, many people have said this. I'm sure you've uttered these words yourself. If you're getting into music to make money, you're getting into the wrong industry.
Absolutely. No question. It's not dissimilar to the rich guy who's made a bunch of money and wants to open a restaurant.
Right.
It's the same
Was
thing.
Was it 90% of all restaurants fail?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know that 90% of studios fail, but yeah, I mean, if you don't
like
know
95.
If you don't know what you're doing, I mean, you should set up a small studio in your bedroom first, right? Or do it. Don't go for the big thing right away if you don't know how to run it. If you haven't got the relationships with clientele, record companies, band managers, bands themselves, you're going to have a beautiful studio that people may come to once or twice, but it's not going to last. It's a real problem.
You're kind of on fire because of the genre. You're mixing a lot of records as well.
Yeah.
In that genre, the Mudvayne record and others.
Yeah. The Nothing Face album, that was TVT. That was great fun. Yeah. The Tommy from that band actually ended up going off and becoming part with Chad, and they became, hell yeah.
Coheed and Cambria, I see popping up.
Yeah.
That was another big band of that period.
That was great. Yeah. Great music. I love that record. That was really great to mix. We did that in New York as well. Fantastic.
Catchy little title.
Yeah. I can't even say it all.
Good Apollo, I'm Burning Star 4, Volume 1, From Fear Through the Eyes of Madness.
Yeah. Well, they were one of the original. They were one of the original comic book as well as album bands, right?
Right.
Like they had a talking bicycle in a comic book, and like
you do.
But you know what? Their fans adore it. This is the thing. Is like they found a fan base that loves that sort of thing. Remember, that was the sort of the time when like online zines were really starting big, and comic books were coming into their own, graphic novels, right? Were coming into their own as being really like valid pieces of art. I remember like Adam from Tool, he would turn me on to a bunch of graphic novels. He's the first one that showed me Hellboy stuff. And but it was becoming a thing. And Alan Moore and the Watchmen was becoming a thing, and Dark Knight was all of a sudden a thing. And so, I mean, that was that genre really took off at that time, and Coheed was kind of going along with that, developing a storyline. They were in progressive music, so they were already telling stories. This was just another outlet for those stories.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, look at Gorillaz with Jamie Hewlett.
Totally.
With Tank Girl. It makes sense to connect all of those dots, and I wish there was more of that. I mean, there is a lot of that, but that was a really good time for music you're talking about there. Where
Sure.
I think Tool themselves with those, I know we're going back to our last video, which for everybody, if you haven't seen it, please check out the first video we did with David. Their video production skills were just out of this world, especially right at the beginning when they didn't have any money. Unbelievable. And
well, Adam was an animator before and a big fan of the Brothers Quay, and had done like a lot of the special effects for Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park. He'd worked on those albums, on those films rather. So, but yeah, I mean, going forwards into the sort of graphic novel things, and what are the biggest film franchises out there right now, right? The Marvel universe, the DC universe, like those are the things that are huge now. And a lot of like music gets into those now. A lot of like more modern rock music gets into that, which is great. So it's sort of like feeding off of each other.
It makes me, go back to Peter, of course. It's like, these are the kinds of artists that it's, I think we talked about this last time, so I'm in danger of repeating myself. The sort of completists, the Bowies, the Gabriels, the Kate Bushes, these people that everything is part of the vision. It's just a work of art.
Yep.
Peter's a national treasure, really.
Peter often has like pieces of art that go along with the music as well, right? There are pieces of art that when we released the Us album, he commissioned the number of artists for the number of songs to all do a piece inspired by that. And so,
incredible.
Yeah. It's always been the visuals, the storytelling, the entire culture, really.
Even though this was a compilation album, he's probably one of the few people that could do an album entitled Videos. because the video content is just so unbelievable.
Sure.
But play the videos. The collaborations album, I presume, is that chronologically correct? 2005 was Sinead?
Again, that would have been probably something that Sinead did with Peter.
Right.
So
but you've got a mixing credit and an engineering credit on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have credits on some records that I'm like, did I work on that? Yeah, a lot of the collaboration stuff will be stuff that I've done with people along the way, and it's just made onto an album.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then more new metal stuff, Skillet.
Yeah. I mixed that. So here's the thing. When I was living in New York, my dream city, and I had an apartment in the West Village, and it was the best. And about a year and a bit after I got that apartment and was kind of ensconced and enjoying living in New York, I met my now ex-wife, who lived in Toronto.
I met my now ex-wife.
Yes. And we got together. And so it's funny because when I was doing the Stained album, I was also partly commuting back to Toronto for the weekends to see her. So I would work in Springfield all week long, drive down on Friday night, try to make the last plane out. If I didn't, I'd take the first plane out in the morning with this cheap little airline called Jets Go. And it existed probably for about 4 or 5 years. And it was like about $120 to fly to Toronto and then back. And then on Monday morning or Sunday night, I would catch the plane back to New York and then drive back up to Springfield and work the week. So I was commuting back and forth from New York and Springfield to Toronto. So after the Stained album and after being there, I ended up moving up to Toronto. So I started working a lot in a studio called Metalworks. And that's when I made mixed that Skillet album. Where's
Metalworks?
Metalworks is in a town called Mississauga.
Oh, I know Mississauga, yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like a suburb of Toronto, but it's kind of its own place as well. Now, over the years, it's grown up to have a city center. And
sure.
Yeah, so it's run by and owned by a guy called Gil Moore. Gil Moore was a drummer, and he was in a band called Triumph in Canada, which is like a power trio. Yeah, much like Rush, but not quite as famous as Rush, but still did very well. And this place was their rehearsal, and Gil ended up buying the parts of the building, and then ended up building a studio. And now he's got Metalworks Institution, which is a school, and it's one of the top music industry schools in North America, and they teach
that's wonderful.
both music production and business and live and lighting, and it's a huge place. I've got a great relationship with them. We do a lot of work there with my charity sometimes, and so I did a lot of mixing up there, Canadian bands and bands like Skillet.
So Silverchair, you still have a strong relationship with them? I see there's a bunch of mixing credits around this period as well.
Yeah. So what happened is they were doing, after we did the Diorama record and Daniel got sick, he then came back later on to do Young Modern. They didn't call me to produce it. He was working with Nick Launay, and there was an engineer that was doing some production, and Daniel was doing some production. And they'd gotten to the point where they were sort of unsure as to where to go with the album. There was a lot that had been recorded. And Nick had to go, he got hired to do the Arcade Fire album. So he was sort of finished with what he was doing. So John Watson, who was Daniel's manager, called me up and said, look, we've got this project, this album that we're working on, this number of songs. They just need a little bit of an outside view on it. So they sent me the tracks, and there was a lot going on. And so Daniel and I spoke, and we removed a lot of things, did a little bit more, and then I mixed it again at Metalworks. He came over, and he was in great shape at that point. He'd gotten healthy again. He was really funny and excited, and so we came and we did the mixing all in Toronto, Mississauga, at Metalworks. Had a great time and made that record, and yeah. So it was slightly different than what we had done on Diorama, but still he kind of moved on, and there was some rawness to it, but then there's some programming. It was sort of a lot of different ideas on that record, and I tried to make sense of it with the mix.
So he came out, was he like doing guitar overdubs and fixing stuff as well? Yeah.
Just a little bit, and a little bit of vocals, but that was sort of it. And we were pretty much, there was a lot recorded. We just needed to coalesce it down into something that was, as much of his vision as we could get with the other ideas, because there were lots of different ideas and different people were trying to drag it in different directions, and we just needed to give it a focus. And I think we managed to do that as much as we could. The writing on it was really great. Like his writing on it was really beautiful. So
you've got tons and tons of things here we could go through, but one that really jumps out to me, of course, is Battle for the Sun. Because that, I know you're incredibly eclectic, and we've talked on the first interview about lots of different genres that you were in. But at that period, you were probably seen as the new metal, or at least the modern rock guy.
Yeah. New
metal has become a little bit of a joke phrase, but you were the modern rock guy. You were the guy that would get bands on the radio for that. How did Placebo come about? Because they were definitely not considered that.
Again, it's like bands find me, and I guess Brian just had heard things that I'd done and liked it, and we met up. We talked about what kind of record we could make, and they said, "Yeah, let's do it." So they came across to Toronto, and again we recorded at Metalworks, and made this thing. We did rehearsing in London first, and like I like to do, go through all the songs, make sure they're as solid as they can be, make sure they're as cohesive, and the vision of the artist is being realized. And then it's like, okay, let's go back to Toronto. We went back to Toronto, and they had a great time. Brian and Steph are incredibly wonderful people. They went to school, they kind of met in school in Europe, where it seems like it was one of those schools where parents kind of shift their kids off when they were difficult. And it was like an American school in Belgium or something like that. Anyway, they met there, and they realized that they were both, I guess you'd call now, it's like what you would call now is non-binary people. So, I mean, Steph is pretty much just straight gay. Brian is, sort of somewhere on the spectrum, and that probably was a lot more difficult than it is now. But incredibly creative, huge fan of lots of old glam music. And, for me, I loved working with Brian and Steph, really talented people. Brian always had, sort of challenges that he would always have to overcome. And there were times where, he would disappear for a few days. You'd have to try and go find him and get him back and do that. But, like a lot of artists, he struggled with, abuses of different things. So, but when he was there, and when we got, the record that we ended up making, I thought was really great. Some really beautiful songs on it. And again, a pleasure to work with.
Some of that feels like a little bit of a Silverchair kind of feeling as well. Obviously not direct comparisons, but working with an artist that maybe is pushing against different things.
Yeah, different challenges, for sure.
Different challenges, yeah. I do feel like, obviously, for being British, as I'm sure you understand, Placebo just kind of slots into a lot of, a lot of our bands were, for want of a better word, very camp.
Yes.
Whether it be Queen or Bowie, and there was, Elton John. I mean, so many artists, and it's no surprise to me that you say that Brian and Placebo love that kind of period of music, because there was always that androgynous, I think is the word, kind of thing that quite British.
They would be exploring sexuality. They would be exploring the lifestyle of not conforming to the both the 9 to 5 and the gender binary specific things. And they like a lot of artists at the time, as you said, the Bowies, the Freddie, all that. It's like you're exploring different things, and they're telling stories at the same time, and telling stories about their experience and how their nonconformity has affected their lives. So
the American International School of Luxembourg was actually the school.
Oh, is that what it was? Okay, Luxembourg, right?
Yep. I had just a quick look up because I couldn't remember as well. Because I remember a bit of the story, but it wasn't until I saw that. They were always fan favorites when I was touring in the early 2000s here in America.
Right.
That was a question I often get asked. Do you know Placebo?
Yeah. Really lovely people. Brian and I ended up corresponding like a lot over text for years. I haven't heard from him in a while, but he would message me like when things would go bad in the world. Like something would happen, somebody would blow something up somewhere, and he'd text me. He'd be very upset, and I'm sure I was on a list of people that he'd reach out to me, and we'd chat for a bit, and then 6 months later, something else terrible would happen, and he'd text me again, and we'd chat again. But incredibly sensitive person, and the world's troubles weighed heavily on his shoulders, I think.
Again, I mean, super like artist, visually really striking. I know we were getting a little melancholy for the times of touring and the hard work. And then we've touched upon like the artistry of the Peter Gabriels and the Kate Bushes and the Bowies, the people that are like completists. They're like dancers and painters and movie directors and songwriters and producers and musicians and everything. Placebo definitely had that. They definitely had that. Everything about them was a statement, and I love that sort of period. And they really exemplified it for me because it was kind of a post Britpop. They weren't quite at the height in the middle of the Blur Oasis time. They came just like 3 or 4 years later, but they really created something really super, super unique that harked back to, I don't know, a time when rock stars were rock stars, when they had something to say. And
this is something that I miss, Warren.
I do.
I love the mystery of not knowing everything about a band and not knowing everything about an artist that I liked. There was something. Now you'd read magazine articles, you'd have Cream or you'd have Enemy or something. You could read a little bit about them, but they weren't as accessible as they are now. And it's sort of, like it's very quick that artists will go from an artist you want to go see live to appearing in a television commercial now. And for me, it's kind of, it's lost a little bit of charm and a little bit of mystery. I
do wonder, so what do you think about this? Because the same things bother me as well. I think there's so much emphasis, like I love education, obviously. Education to me, learning the technical side and teaching the technical side of what we do is super important to me. But when the music starts to be analyzed in chords and melody, etc., I have no problem with that. If I love something and I want to reproduce it, of course I'd love, what was that chord sequence? What is that melody? Why is that note? What's suspending and creating this tension? Of course I love all of those things. But then all of these artists we're talking about don't think that way. None of them. Even the biggest, most successful. There's no way you're sitting with David Bowie and he's going, well, I was thinking about the Mixolydian going to the Phrygian, and that just didn't happen. and I feel like when we go too much down the rabbit hole of analyzing that stuff so heavily, we miss the spirit of what makes art and creativity so unique.
I think that the best who know those things are able to transcend it. And so, like the Robert Fripps of the world, they'll learn those scales, or Josh from Stone Sour, right? He'll go into these different scales, but then learn them, and then so much, and then just let it flow, so that you're not thinking about necessarily the technique of it, but you know the technique so well that what you're feeling in your heart can then come out of your fingers without having to go through your brain first.
It's an interesting time, the information age, that we have access to everything, but these kinds of artists like Brian and Placebo as an entity are worth their weight in gold, because they sort of just poke their head up. Blade Runner, what we're talking about, Brazil.
I blame Tab. I always found Tab a little frustrating, because it seemed to be like an exclusive language, right? You know how I can't read music very well. I can, but very, very slowly. But at least it's universal, with transposition for horn instruments, for example. But basically, it's still the same notes. You're still speaking the same language. Tab is purely fretted stringed instruments. That's it.
Right.
It's only for guitars and bass. It's not for anything else. So it always felt a little bit exclusive to me, and it always bothered me. I was never a big fan. I understand how it can make things easier for people to count and learn to get, string, fret number, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea of it, but it always felt a little bit, just sort of exclusive to those musicians only.
We're blessed at a time where technical virtuosity is through the roof. When I was a kid, I knew 20 people that played guitar in my local village and town, and that was great. But there were all like massive differences of level. Some were strumming along and playing in bands that way, and others were, super technical. But the ones that were super technical were like pretty minimal. Now, we open up our Instagram feeds, and there is scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of guitar players from all over the place, even just in the local area, that are sitting there learning all the technical things. Yep. And there is a swathe of YouTube channels that promote the cleverness about the music, and there is very little support for the creativity. We're always wondering where the next this is coming from, or the next that's coming from, and it rarely, if at all, ever comes from a music school background. Even Genesis, going back to Peter, yes, there's an intellect. I mean, they came from Charterhouse, and that was a very, very good school with a massive history of, especially in that late 60s period. There's a documentary on it, came out years ago, about how they kind of like did they changed the rules, didn't they, of schooling. Sure. They basically were like, we're going to support creativity. And if Genesis were the only band that was produced by Charterhouse, then they obviously that worked. That worked. Yeah.
Hey, the Rolling Stones were London School of Economics, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. There is. Yeah, I suppose I'm just opening a big can of worms here, because I feel like it's the creativity that always wins. Always wins.
But you know what I find is that what maybe we're missing in some cases now, and I've seen this with, I had a good talk actually with used to be the president of Warner Canada here, who's a friend of mine, and he said he's been working. He worked for a number of times with a lot of young kids from wealthy families, and he found that they might be really talented songwriters, but they just don't need it that much. Yeah. And there's something about, unfortunately, economic disparity that makes you hungry. Like, when was one of the best times of British music that came out, right? The Clash and the Specials and the Pistols. They weren't rich kids.
76, 75, 76 to like 85 is just the ultimate period of creativity.
And what were their options?
Yeah.
Was it be in a band, or if you could get a job at the docks, or if you could get a job in the mines, or there were no options. So it's do this or starve. So there's something about being hungry that feeds creativity.
I'm trying to think of the polite word to use, or just being screwed up.
Yeah, there is that.
You can be wealthy and screwed up and be creative. Sure. It seems
yeah,
you need something to rail against.
Yeah. I mean, that gives you a story to tell. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, an expression
Yeah, no, I completely concur. I mean, there's, the heavy metal, the British heavy metal was all born out of, almost entirely from the Midlands and the North, where there was
Yep.
a ton of poverty. And
Sure.
you hear Tony Iommi and Ozzy and all talking about that it was either working, in a canning factory or milling stuff, because obviously Tony lost his fingertips in a milling machine, didn't he?
Yep.
I paraphrase because I don't know the exact quote, but to reinforce what you said, Segovia said something to the effect of, all of my best students gave up. Now, that's me paraphrasing, but the spirit is, when things come easily to people, it's more like, okay, next, what else can I do now?
Yeah, that's it. Things have to be difficult, and things have to be not just handed to you to make you. It's much like anything. To appreciate something, you have to work hard at it.
Mm-hmm.
To become really special at it, you have to work really hard at it. Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. I don't know if that's really still a thing, but there is something to just you're mastering something, and it's not necessarily just sitting in your bedroom and playing. That's one thing, but it's also getting out and performing and like, we work in the world of live music. You've got to be out performing. You've got to know how to engage a crowd. You've got to know how to play the music and tell the story and engage the crowd. This is I go back again to like the world of TikTok and the world of YouTube, and it's like your audience isn't staring at you. You've got to know what it's like to be at the bottom to know what it's like at the top. Right? You have to know how to be booed off stage, right? At some point in your career, and then get up from that and go, you know what? I don't care that I got booed off stage. I'm going up again. I'm going to try that again. The ones who get booed off stage once, it's like, oh, okay, I'm done. Well, that's it. And if you're not hungry for it, if you don't have to do it, then you end up finding the next thing.
So what are your days like now? Are you looking for artists to develop? Is that something that you enjoy?
Yeah, I'm working with a young artist called Blackbird. She's from Toronto, and we're working. She's a very, I'd say like if Adele were a little more rocky. She's got that kind of big voice, but really passionate, really powerful. She's a fantastic singer. I'm working with a band called Crownlands. They're a Canadian band. They're signed on Universal Canada. And it's a two-piece. We just released an 18-minute single.
Wow.
They're obviously a progressive band.
Nice.
And the singer is non-binary. They are Cody Bowles is their name, and they're mixed race, Mi'kmaq, Indigenous, and then Kevin the Como, who's a guitar player. He's so Cody sings and plays drums, and Kevin plays guitar and Taurus pedals and everything else. And they do prog delight music, not all about Indigenous issues, but some. We're just releasing an album in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I saw on your resume, White Buffalo.
White Buffalo.
By Crownlands. Yeah.
That was the last major single that they had on the EP, and then we're doing the album. Yeah, they just released it much similar in the length of name as the Coheed and Cambria, same sort of thing. So
that seems to be Joni as well. Because I think that work you did came out on Love Has Many Faces, a quartet, a ballet, waiting to be danced. I think that's a thing for you.
Okay,
you work on albums with long titles.
There you go.
Certainly more than anybody else.
I'm doing a lot of mixing at home too. Like I've got my studio here, so I do a lot of mixing and remote productions. In fact, too, I'm doing less of the air miles and more of the Zoom. So it's a band in Germany that I'm working with. I did they're called Siska's Element. They send me a track and I'll do some production on it, send it back, and then bring it back and mix it. And then a band called Moonshot from Finland.
Nice.
I did go over and do a band with a record with their previous band, but that's dissolved now, and they become Moonshot, and they send me tracks and we do Zoom. I'd walk them through vocals and produce their vocals from here, and then they send it over for me to mix. Or
amazing.
So
Are you
yeah,
using audio movers for that?
I use audio movers. I've tried the Lander plugin. I haven't quite got it working yet, but it's another possibility. But oftentimes it's audio movers and Zoom or Google Meets or whatever. So I've got a pro Zoom account, so I can go forever on it.
Good.
Yeah.
Like, we can only work for an hour. It's going to come up any second now. Sorry.
That's right. That's it. We have to get back on. It's a real pain in the butt. So yeah, I pay for that.
I've been in those meetings. Your home setup, are you breaking out and using hardware? Are you mixing, or are you mixing almost entirely in the box?
I mix entirely in the box now. There were years where I've done hybrids. I had a studio here in Toronto, and I had a SSL AWS 900. And so I would do hybrid mixing, some through the console, some through Pro Tools. But I sort of consolidated down into my place here, and it just kind of got less and less, and I was plugging less and less in. And I was like, you know what? I'm just not using it anymore. And for recalls, when you're getting recalls for multiple projects in a day, you can switch back and forth from different bands and different things that you're working on very easily. These days, everybody wants specific recalls with just little tiny movements, and be able to do that with the old plug and play system. It's never quite the same. If you have an SSL and you're redoing the thing, it's always a little bit different. So I found being in the box, just from a business standpoint, made it a lot easier. And these days the quality of the IO systems are great. I use all the UAD stuff. I've got all the UAD plugins.
Mixing with UAD plugins.
And most of the waves as well. And,
sure.
Sound toys. I've got Isotope, got the whole palette of it. So,
which interface do you use from UA?
I've got this 2 satellites. I've got the X8P, which is the main one. And then I've got an old Apollo quad.
Nice.
So I've got lots of DSP. I never run out of that. And yeah. It's a very cut down system. I use the dock and the S1 from Avid.
Oh, okay.
So I still like the tactile feedback
use
of
of faders.
Yeah, can't get away from that. I've tried to do just the little mouse thing, just doesn't work for me. Even if it's just I've just got a bank of 8 and my one main one, and you know what? There was a game changer a little while ago where you could actually customize on the dock a lot of the plugin settings. So I've got the knobs on the dock that I can use for all of my compressors that always have the threshold in one place and the input in the other place and the output. It's always the same. So I'm always just grabbing the same thing. It's very, very quick. One of the things that I really hate, especially with young artists and people that are either starting or at a certain part of their career, will maybe think about me and either think, oh well, he's going to be really expensive, or he probably won't like us, so we won't even bother calling. Or I just like to say, if the music is good, I'm willing to listen to anything. And I have management, and they can get things through to me. I love my job. Still love what I do. I love making music. I love mixing music. I love producing music. I love writing with people. All these things. I hate it when people don't call just out of certain assumptions. I'm very approachable. If I don't think I have anything to contribute to your music, then I'll tell you. But if I do, then there's always a way things can work out. So I just would encourage anybody who's interested in speaking to me about working, give me a call. I've got a Facebook page. I've got a Instagram page. You can send messages, or I can redirect things to my management.
We'll put a contact down below. Let me know what you think is the best contact, and I'll put it down below.
Okay.
Underneath the video.
Great.
It reminds me, and for everybody watching, years ago when I first launched the channel, maybe 8 years ago, one of the early videos I did, I interviewed Kenny Enoff, and I took us around his home studio. It wasn't his home; it's in a little industrial part, but his personal studio. And about 2 weeks after the video came out, I saw him and I said, "Hey, Kenny, how's it going?" He's like, I got 4 albums from that video. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. He goes, yeah, people are contacting me because they didn't realize they could actually hire me. They thought the only person that would hire me would be a huge label. And Kenny's not cheap, don't get me wrong, but he's not as expensive as people think.
Sure. That's always the thing. People have this assumption of what you're going to cost or what your interests are. And for me, it's and this is for, like, I get pigeonholed into being like the rock guy, as you said before, or the new metal guy or whatever. I've done work with Joni Mitchell and Sinead O'Connor and, music from all kinds of different styles. For me, the genre doesn't matter. As long as the music is done with conviction and the writing is good, I'll listen. And I usually have something to contribute.
Thank you ever so much, David. I really appreciate your time. These 2 interviews have been absolutely wonderful. Really, truly wonderful.
Great pleasure for me too, Warren. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, you work with, most of my favorite artists. So
I'm glad. I hope I did you proud.
Yeah, I think it's like, I was thinking about this the other day. I think it's you, Hugh, and John Leckie. Hugh Padgham, you, and John Leckie are, and Daniel, of course, for obvious reasons.
Yep.
I think you guys have all made albums that hit all the right things. Career-defining records by artists, definitely. But see, for me, I want the songs, the performances, and the production. Mm-hmm. And it's nice when you get 2 of the 3, and that can usually work. But when you get all 3, and it's those kinds of artists, like, of course, Peter, that are just head and shoulders.
Leckie spent a lot of years coming down to Real World. He's a sweetheart.
Oh,
he's so nice.
Oh, don't tell me that.
Yeah,
I haven't even tried to reach out to interview him.
Oh, he's great. He was always a sweetheart. So I think it'd be no problem. I don't know for sure. I haven't spoken to him in years and years, but he was lovely. Every time he came down to Real World to do a project, he was lovely.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Please leave any comments and questions below. I really enjoyed the comments and the questions you left on the last video we did. And thanks, everybody that kept saying, when's part 2? When's part 2? I got like 5 or 6 emails in the last couple of weeks going, wait there. It's been ages. Where's this part 2? So thanks for doing this, David. I appreciate it.
My great pleasure, Warren. Thank you so much for having me.